Well, this is different. Minecraft Story Mode, there's an arc where the heroes get trapped in a seemingly infinite hallway of portals that lead to other worlds, all with different themes, threats, and things to encounter. My last big video essay was all about this game, and when I got to this part, I mentioned how this premise very slightly reminded me of something I've played before. Advent of Ascension. This is a Minecraft mod created by Zolova, though as far as I can tell it's currently being developed by a completely different team led by T-Slat. It's a mod that adds a lot, to be perfectly honest, though the most notable new feature being the inclusion of about 20 all-new dimensions. Think like the Nether in the end, like there's just way more of stuff like that in the game now. All of them have wildly different themes, loot, and challenges to find. I'm not a modding guy per se, but after a good friend Pajaman got me into it, something about this one in particular really hooked me back when I played it for the first time in 2020, and this year as well. And I kind of want to talk about it in a big video like this. So here's what I'm going to do. A tier list. Pretty basic format, though I promise this is going to be one of those tier list videos that actually has some effort put into it. I'm going to be analyzing the many dimensions of this mod, talking about things I like, things I dislike, maybe some interesting trivia if I happen to know it. A couple of caveats before we start though. 1, these are my opinions. 2, I am currently playing this version of this mod. This is one of those mods that seems to always be in development, so the farther away from this day I'm starting this video you're watching, and the farther away from this video's publication you're watching it, the more likely some of these points I bring up will be irrelevant. Though even if this video is super dated, I hope it's entertaining all the same. 3, I'm not your average Minecraft player. In a bad way? Maybe. I play Minecraft very differently from most people. For one, I play with keep inventory on. Oh, come on! I'm also not above using cheats or swapping to creative mode to skip absolute busy work or forgo mechanics I find annoying. These factors will likely affect how much I like these dimensions, although I'll still try to be fair about it. 4, this video is for entertainment purposes. I'm going to be complaining a lot sometimes in this video, but I should mention that I'll be mostly exaggerating because it's funny to do so. I'll also be talking a lot about things I think would be cool to have in this mod. Again, this is mostly for entertainment purposes, and I have no expectations of anything I mention to be seriously added. But if by chance a developer does watch this and happen to like anything I mention, I would not have any issues whatsoever with you straight up stealing my ideas. Number 5, this skin is not a fursona. This is a character named Galloway. He's this opossum from a game I was working on but put on hiatus. And this is a skin of him made by a good friend Computer vs. World. Go follow her Tumblr. The skin is adorable and I absolutely love using it, but this character is not a fursona. I've had people assume that before. I want to make that clear. So, alrighty then. Let's go ahead and jump into this. So, a question you're going to be asking yourself starting this is how exactly do you access these new dimensions? When you start a new playthrough, you're just kind of dropped into a world that feels like normal Minecraft, barring some new enemies and a level up system and some new ores. The first step is to find one of these, a ruined teleporter frame. They're found underground and aren't too rare, although it took me hours to find one in my world, to a point in which I eventually peeked into spectate mode just to find one. Again, I'm not above cheating. Once you've found one, you need to talk to this ghost to give him some food, and he'll give you a book with instructions on how to access other dimensions. You do so by taking these rocks and making a frame out of them, almost like another portal, but way more complicated. Although there are these 5 separate rune rocks you also need, and the positions you place them in the frame is specific, and finding them can be a little grindy, and there's one that needs to be crafted for some reason. Okay, this part's a little annoying. When you look into the book, a little object will fall out, a realm stone. Hi, Moja, how you doing? Hey, you guys ever met Moja the Minecraft llama? When you look in the book, a little object will fall out, a realm stone. These things look suspiciously like those orbs that give you magic in Shepherdmancer, by the way, the game I made a few years back, way before I played this mod. Like, it's absolutely a coincidence. I just think it's kind of funny. These things are interesting. Basically, by completing certain tasks while holding a realm stone in your hand, it will convert the realm stone into the realm stone of a particular dimension, depending on what criteria you just fulfilled. And then you can use that stone on a portal to activate it. These tasks can be quite random, honestly, although the game does straight up just tell you how to acquire them. The real challenge is actually doing them. So at this point, it might be worth mentioning the tier system of the game. There are about 20 dimensions, but you can't just access them in any order you want. There are 4 tiers to these dimensions, more or less ranking them in terms of how dangerous they are. You must access at least some dimensions of a lower tier to access ones of a higher one. And basically how they do this is by making the tasks to acquire the realm stone of later game dimensions involve elements from previous ones. For example, acquiring the iron mine dimension, a tier 2 dimension, involves the use of a mineralization station, which is a block you can only find in a tier 1 dimension. I kind of wish there was a way to go out of order for a few of these. It could make speedruns or challenge runs more interesting, although going by things the devs have talked about in the mod's Discord, I get the impression that this would be very against the artistic intention of the mod, which is totally understandable. Also, hi again, Moja. It's a pretty smart design choice too, because from what I remember, I think older versions did let you access dimensions in just about any order you wanted, which led to players accidentally visiting ones that are way too dangerous for the point in the game they are, as well as just being confusing in general by giving them too many options. So anyway, obviously we're going to be looking at some tier 1 dimensions first, and we have 5 options. I'm going to be talking about Preacatia to start. It's the first one I accessed, as its realm stone requires you to craft a blank stone with one of each sapling in the game. Also, do you want something? Can I help you? Get out of here. Hey! And given my affinity for auto bamboo smelters, I inevitably do a lot of exploring for a jungle early on, and therefore are exploring enough to actually have everything I need to make this quite easily. This is a dimension based on an unspecified prehistoric time, complete with dinosaurs, enormous trees, huge insects, and lots of fossils. It's actually a pretty great first impression to the mod, in my opinion. If you're playing this yourself, I'd actually recommend doing this world first, if only for the skeleton tools, which make bones randomly drop when you mine stuff. Yeah, do you like your trees of bones? You get that with this mod. These bones you can use to make bone meal, which is always useful, especially early on. Also, Moshe is moving so much that I can't reliably look at the camera and read my script at the same time. You can also make skeletal ingots with them, which can be used to make an early game armor with a pretty decent special effect. You can also make the Bone Blaster. Yes, this mod adds guns as well. Also, the free cam mod I'm doing will crash the game if I fire this with items that are not vanilla, so you cannot see this in action, unfortunately. Download the mod yourself, play this. Whenever you visit a new dimension, some things you'll definitely want to watch out for are structures containing unique loot, ores, and enemies, some of which themselves can drop items of interest. This world introduces a total of 11 enemies, which is actually quite huge. I'd even wager to bet that it's the most to be featured in a single world. Given the overwhelming majority of them are melee mobs, which is a little boring and something I'll touch on later, but the huge variety in shapes and sizes for them all makes up for it here. Some favorites being the Dinotherium, an elephant-like monster notable mostly for its size, the giant snail, which is a lot faster than you'd expect it to be, but also leaves a trail of slime behind it that can damage you. A neat twist on what would normally be a pretty generic monster. And the saber-tooth is just adorable. I can't say there are many contenders in this mod for cutest mob, but this is definitely one of them. Like, this thing is adorable. There are also 2 bosses to this dimension, which... Okay, I've been mulling over how I'm going to handle talking about the bosses in this video because I have very mixed feelings on them. I think I've decided that I'm simply not going to really mention or, like, have them affect the rating at all. Here's the thing, this mod adds a bunch of bosses, typically 2 per dimension, although I'm personally not the biggest fan of the bosses. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say that they're consistently my least favorite thing about this mod. Just about all of them are either really frustrating, or take too long, or too easy to cheese. I swear there's like 2 of them that are actually fun to fight, and it's these 2. No hyperbole, if I were to factor bosses into my grading for how much I enjoy these dimensions, a good half of them would go down like at least a full rank. I'm not even kidding, they're that unenjoyable to me. If you guys want, maybe I could elaborate a bit more on why I dislike them later in this essay, but for the time being, I think it's best to just ignore them for now. Something cool that can spawn the dimension are the Caillou temples, giant pyramids filled with traps. There's also these underground dens, and these nests spawn Archaeopteryx monsters. There's a ton of variety here overall. It was an amazing first impression to this playthrough. I'll be putting this in the extremely fun to explore tier. Okay, let's get off of you now. Oh my goodness, you are annoying. Our next dimension is the Deeplands. The gimmick to this one being that it is an enormous... Moshe, stop! The gimmick to this one being that it is an enormous cavern. Now, that might not sound very special, especially with caves and cliffs being a thing now, but I think it's worth noting that this area was a thing before that big update, so it's actually quite original. Now, this is a dimension I have mixed feelings on. I like it overall. I think it's fun to explore. It has a pretty unique aesthetic for being just a cave, and some of its loot is fun too. I feel this is a dimension that really eases you into the more unique elements of this mod as a whole, and I praise it a lot for that. On the other hand, okay, I'm just going to start with the color palette. It's gray. It is way too damn gray. The walls are gray, the floors are gray, the loot is gray, the enemies are gray, the boss is gray. A dimension having a unifying color that really ties everything together is a pretty common and good thing to have, but gray is such a neutral color to begin with that it has this effect of homogenizing a lot of what would otherwise be pretty unique elements. I couldn't tell you the difference between these two items, like I'm not even kidding. My other big issue with this dimension are its enemies. They not only look the same, but they also act the same too. This is actually an issue I have with a lot of this mod, to be fair. So many enemies have this near identical melee AI where they just charge at you relentlessly. I love a game with a big, unique, and memorable cast of enemies. Characters that mechanically challenge you, ask you for different types of strategies, and can be picked out at a glance as they stick in your memory your entire playthrough. Minecraft itself is actually a really good example of this. Every enemy has just enough about them to make them unique and fresh, but never enough that they feel overwhelming to fight. It also allows them to be paired in interesting ways too, making for all sorts of combinations that require different strategies, priorities, and approaches. In Advent of Ascension, the only thing half these enemies ever do is walk towards you in a straight line. There's no strategy. All you ever need to do is continually walk backwards and hit the closest enemy. Or you could just place some water down, or make a ring of fences, or you could even just pillar 2 blocks up to effectively hard counter an unreasonable amount of foes. Even several bosses fall victim to this. Now, I gotta say that I don't have an issue with melee enemies in this game in general, but how they're handled here feels very poorly thought out. It even makes me wonder what the point of having this many monsters across the entire mod is in the first place, when they all act nearly identical like this. It even brings this problem where the only way to effectively make areas harder is through raw enemy spam, which this mod does engage in quite a bit, to be perfectly honest. And unless you're making a YouTube thumbnail, enemy spam is kinda boring. How you make melee monsters like this more interesting is by varying how they approach you, or by giving them some sort of reaction to taking damage. Heck, there's actually a few rare examples of this in this mod, like the Fungebacks, which release toxic spores when hit, instantly forcing you to consider your surroundings when fighting it. Or the Zargs, which create copies of a weaker enemy that can't deal or take damage, but have a hitbox which can mess with your aim, and confuse you as to what your immediate vicinity is actually a threat. I wish there was more stuff like that in this game. Heck, as an example for some cool ideas for this dimension alone, what if some enemies could potentially magnetize you towards them? There's also this enemy called the Case Construct that drops a rare item when killed. What if it ran away from you instead of trying to chase you down like every other enemy? It would... Moshe, stop. It would create these instances where you charge through other monsters to get to it, potentially putting yourself in danger for the sake of a rare item. Could be interesting. And speaking of interesting, this is one of those dimensions that used to have a very different terrain generation. Yeah, this mod has been in development for a very long time, so a lot of, dimensions have been changed very radically, and the Deeplands used to be much more open, and with these black trees all over the place. Personally, for as annoying as cavernous terrain can be to navigate, I actually prefer the change they made in like the newer versions of this mod. It feels more like an actual cave, though I do kind of miss the black trees. They kind of look cool and I kind of wish they could be brought back. Overall, this dimension is fine. There's something cool to explore here, although there's also a lot that's underwhelming. I'll put it in the I like it, but something is missing tier. Our next dimension is Barathos. The wiki describes this place as a desert wasteland, which kind of sounds like it would be boring to explore. I mean, how interesting can you make a desert with barely anything? Well, there's actually quite a lot going on here. Hi, Moja. First off, it's the first dimension I explored where I actively started looking out for a structure, as opposed to just checking out whatever I found. The Baron Castles. They're quite small, but the first cluster I ran into had some items I found incredibly useful. You can also find the Mineralization Station here, an incredibly useful block that lets you transmute your unwanted ores and gemstones into coins, which are basically a currency that all NPCs in this game take. Also, it's kind of fun to just run through these castles, avoiding all enemies as best you can, and then just drilling out the side once you got all the loot. It's a good feeling, and kind of a strategy that works for a little too many of the structures, to be perfectly honest. It's kind of comical just how many structures can be cheesed just by mining through them or building over them, but I digress. The enemies here are pretty cool too. It's another dimension where they're mostly melee mobs, although at least they all look distinct at a glance this time. Seriously, it's cool how they all fit the area aesthetically, despite how many colors they use. It might be because they tend to be more pastel colors, making them look dusty in a way. There's even a couple with some interesting nuances to them, like the Emperor Beast, that has a huge knockback effect and gives you a nauseous effect as well. My headcanon is that this thing hits you so hard that it gives you a concussion. I mean, it certainly looks painful when you get blown back. There's also an interesting passive enemy here that has natural spikes. And underground, you can find these rare enemies called the Squigglers. If at any point you are in its line of sight, you are set on fire. That is interesting. It makes them a pretty notable priority enemy. Oh yeah, the underground too. Okay, this underground kind of confuses me a little. So above the surface, it's a pretty cool desert. But below, it's kind of hell-themed for some reason. There's tons of stuff on fire, the blocks you mine are called Hellstone, the mobs are more hellish, and there's even a hell-themed ore you can find down here. The second theming to this dimension feels a little out of place. There's already a hell dimension in Minecraft naturally, and it pulls off everything you can do with that theme like it incredibly well, making these generic caves feel a little redundant. Especially since all the hell part of this dimension amounts to is just random caves of a red coat of paint. I don't know, I feel like anything interesting you wanted to do down here would be more appropriate to move to the Nether proper. This mod actually does add a ton of original stuff to the Nether, though I'm not covering in this video. I just want to bring that up because, like, there is a precedence for that. And then maybe you could rework the underground areas of Barathos to work with, like, the desert theming a little bit better. Heck, a thought that comes to mind is maybe catacombs? There's clearly some kind of monarchy vibe to this dimension too, with the existence of the Baroness, which I know I said I wasn't going to talk about bosses, though she was easily like one of my favorite fights in the game, and the only one I really want to learn more about. She's the only humanoid in this entire dimension, and it just got me curious what her deal was. What is she the Baron of? What happened to her subjects? Have they died? Have they left to other dimensions? Have they turned into the monsters? Maybe her kingdom has been long dead and the reason she's here is because she's some kind of zombie or immortal. Like, I don't know, I feel like there has to be a lot of hidden lore to this character and I just kind of want to learn more. She's very interesting based off what little I know about her. So overall, I like this dimension. I'm adding it to the fun to explore tier. Our next dimension is Laetia? I think that's how you say it. And you know what? I like this one too. For starters, it's got a really cool aesthetic, being very autumny while also feeling somewhat alien. These freakishly tall trees tipped with white leaves are just called cores for some reason. Really makes an impression. Not to mention the veiny foliage that just looks uncomfortable to be around. Remember when I criticized the Deeplands for, while making a neat choice in making all parts of its world one general color scheme, doing so poorly due to picking such a neutral color? This dimension is a much better example of how to pull this off well. Its floral and fauna are so oppressively orange, yet still stick out from one another. This even extends to the enemies, and even beyond that, I quite like the enemies here. First off, I think we have our first honest-to-God ranged unit, the Lilentian Casters. They're often paired with the melee mob, the Lilentian Warrior, for a nice 1-2 combo of classic enemy formation tropes. Moshe, can you please calm down? They got these weird four-eyed flies, too. You know, something about the enemies of this dimension just also look incredibly alien to me. Everything has either multiple heads or an abnormal amount of eyes. These two in particular make me wonder if there's even supposed to be some sort of civilization here, and as they're clearly more humanoid than everything else. Eventually I got bored of the surface and began burrowing to see if I could find anything underground. It was here that I discovered that the world is mirrored on the bottom. The underside of this world is an exact copy of the top half, with trees growing downwards. It's super cool to find, but I just don't know what it really adds to the world. Like, why would you go down here? Like, ever? Aside from these two structures, nothing really spawns down here. It's a pain in the butt to traverse. Heck, it's even hard to see due to how dark it is. But then I look at how prominently the wiki, mentions this feature of the world, and the realm stone is even called the flipped realm stone in, the achievement, and then I realize that this is supposed to be a defining feature of the world, isn't it? Oh, hey, Rain. I mean, it looks cool, but it's not really super interesting as of right now. Maybe this will be something that'll be added upon in future updates. I don't know why, but my first thought is to maybe make the underside an inverse in terms of hostility as well, as opposed to just the generation of it. The upper half has a ton of monsters, but is easy to run through, while the bottom half is peaceful with no monsters, but is treacherous to traverse. There exist friendly NPCs in this dimension, which I think is the first time I'm mentioning them in this video. Yeah, occasionally you can find villages and banks and lotto men who will trade you for various items. What if, to emphasize this, the structures friendly NPCs spawn in would only spawn in the bottom half? Maybe they could even have flipped gravity, too. I don't know why, but doing trades with villagers when they're upside down and you're right side up I think would be a pretty memorable part of the game if something like that were ever implemented. Also, maybe make it easier to tell that the underside area exists in the first place. It could be as easy as tweaking the world generation so more holes appear. Overall, I enjoy this dimension, although the underdeveloped underside left a lot to be desired for me. I'm adding it to the fun to explore but missing something tier. Our final dimension for this video, and the final tier 1 dimension, is Creeponia. Yeah, this is going to be a multi-parter, actually. It kind of helps me pace these essays better. I'm going to be releasing the series in 4 parts, and then once that's out, I'm going to add the video into one big supercut and then upload that. I'll be sure to fix any errors I make for that final edit too, so if you notice anything objectively wrong I mentioned, feel free to speak up. Anyway, I'm going to jump ahead here and tell you that this is the first dimension in the bottom tier, the I don't want to go back tier. I'm not the biggest fan of Creeponia, although I don't think it's necessarily because of the world itself. Between you and me, I'm actually not the biggest fan of creepers. What? How does that even happen? Okay, hear me out. The enemy design of Minecraft is generally fantastic and something I think tends to get overlooked. They all look unique, are interesting and distinct from one another. They have unique creative intricacies and battle methods. Heck, even ones that tend to be disliked, I sometimes find myself enjoying quite a bit. Like, the Phantom's kind of a notorious one. Like, I joke with my friends all the time about how much I love the Phantoms, but, everyone else hates it for some reason. These things aren't that hard to deal with. They're just super fun to fight. I don't know, man. Of every enemy in this game, though, none has ever caused me more frustration than the Creeper. Ever since I first played this game back in 2010, this has consistently been my least favorite enemy in the game. I get that there are easy ways to deal with them, but at the end of the day, an enemy whose entire gimmick is to silently sneak up on behind you and unleash a one-hit kill attack is just not fun. They're frustrating. They force you to rebuild your shit all the time. They're the sole reason I play with mob griefing off. They're kind of ugly looking. Their drops aren't even that interesting either. With that in mind, is it any surprise that I don't like the dimension entirely based around this thing? It feels weirdly underwhelming and overwhelming at the same time. Everything is this ugly shade of green. It all blends in and can be genuinely difficult to traverse. Every mob is relentless and has some flavor of exploding attack. Seriously, 10 minutes into this world and I was already tired of the explosion sound effect. The underground is the most boring we've seen yet, which wouldn't be a huge deal, but they clearly want you to explore it, as there are 3 ore types you need to hunt down for some reason. That feels like quite a lot for how little interesting is down here. The host enemy is cool, I'll give it that. I think I remember back in the day this thing spawned in the overworld actually, and defeating it is how you got access to this dimension. Though, that has been changed. It's cool that they repurposed the monster instead of removing it entirely. Now, if only they could do that with my favorite enemy in the game. We'll get to that later. The structures aren't even interesting either. 3 of them just house an NPC, which most dimensions have anyway, and the 4th is a pretty basic boss platform. I don't know, something about this dimension just doesn't feel finished, and it's probably my least favorite place so far. Huh. Kind of sad to leave the video on a downer, to be perfectly honest, although I guess that sometimes happens. 4 out of 5 I enjoy is pretty awesome, though. And those are just the Tier 1 dimensions. Anyway, I hope you folks are enjoying this video so far. In Part 2, we're going to be tackling the first half of the Tier 2 dimensions. There's a lot of Tier 2 dimensions, so that alone might take a while. Feel free to give this video a like and share if you're enjoying it so far. It really helps the channel. Thank you to my Patreon supporters, Royalblood, Sean, and Great Wolf. Thank you, Moja, for getting in the way so much. And I will see you folks later. Thanks for watching.